Born in Ireland in a town called Bandon in West Cork. Let's see, two brothers and a sister. They're all still living in Ireland. Both my parents were teachers. So the emphasis, shall we say, was very much on academics. I think it's fair to say that standards and expectations were pretty clearly laid out. And the importance of whatever job you were doing it well, doing it right, and dare I say the importance of doing it right the first time.
One thing we knew growing up is that he might not say that much, but when he spoke, you listened, and it was usually worth listening to.
Going back 30 years, I've been in 6 different locations.
Once we started moving, the 5 of us became very close because that's all you have. That's your constant, and throughout life, you know, it's the 5 of us that are there for each other.
Well, I think no matter where we have gone, I think that individually they would agree that the best times have been when, you know, we've all been together, all 5 of us. The thread, the continuity has certainly come from the family, and I think we enjoying each other's company. My wife certainly has instilled the values and strength into the children, and she's done an extraordinary job of that. So it's worked out very well.
My parents, I think, are both some of the strongest, most focused people I know, and that has come through. I mean, that has come through in balancing work and balancing family.
The fascinating thing for me about the Brooklyn site is the fact that right down the street, we'll see it in a moment, is where Pfizer began in 1849. So we've been manufacturing on this site for 153 years, continuously. And the organization grew up to the 1950s and 60s, and at that point in time, everything was totally integrated on the site. Research, development, manufacturing, sales, marketing, administration, distribution, everything was done here on the site. That's at 1849. That building was added in 1860, and then we've got the old administration building now, the school. Back in the 1980s, Pfizer was going through a difficult business cycle. And at the same time, Brooklyn, the community, Williamsburg in particular, was going through a very difficult time. And then came a turning point, both for Pfizer and for Brooklyn, because at that point in time, Brooklyn itself was going through a difficult time in terms of very high crime rate, very high unemployment. And our chairman at the time, Ed Pratt, faced a decision. Do we stay in Brooklyn or do we leave? An awful lot of companies, manufacturing companies, left Brooklyn because there used to be a huge manufacturing base in Brooklyn, but it's largely evaporated. But he decided, and led by Ed Pratt, the decision was we will stay. Not only that, but we're going to go beyond that and do something about the conditions in the immediate community. So that led to a program, a 3-part program to focus on housing, on education, and on jobs. What was done back in the late 80s, early 90s, I think was a tremendous example of the power of a company to influence the future of the community and to contribute to the future of the community.
Some of the values, you know, that we talk about all the time are respect for people, community, integrity. But I think he, along with most colleagues, have shown those values all along.
Nice to see you. Good to see you. Welcome.
Sorry for the short notice.
It's okay. We were here May of 1992. And that was about 10 years ago, and Pfizer was the one who really gave us the initial impetus to start the school, and they funded the initial renovation. And 10 years later, we started out with 50 students in 1992.
Right.
And today, 10 years later, we have 450 students. We're a pre-K to 8 school.
We're very proud to show not just the facility, but the impact we've had on the community. So, but to go over and talk to Sonia, the principal, and meet the kids and so on, and listen to them talk about what they do and the excitement, it's tremendous. It's a real-life example of what can be done.
It's wonderful to see him being recognized. We see how hard he works, and we see his involvement here. But it's not just recognizing him. I mean, I think the recognition is more that Pfizer is doing the right thing. Pfizer's always done the right thing.
It's clearly a tremendous honor, but I would have to say that it is a recognition of what Pfizer has done for the community, and I feel very fortunate and very honored to be Pfizer's ambassador on this particular occasion.
I grew up in Washington, D.C. My parents are both native Washingtonian. Both of my parents were very, very invested in voluntary public service. You know, they didn't, they weren't real fancy about it. They were very much self-educated people who, weren't fancy in their speech. They just were doers. For me, the law has always been an instrument, for social change. Some people are passionately in love with the law for its own sake, but for me, it's what the law can accomplish that's more important to me. Is the people that it helps that are more important to me than the instrument itself.
He's a person who has, in position after position, found a way to work to improve the lives of the people of this city. I mean, Brooklyn particularly, actually, in the Brooklyn DA's office and in the U.S. Attorney's office, but more generally the city, and I guess also really the district, which goes out beyond into the suburbs. But he has always looked for a way to use the resources and the authority of his office to improve the lot of the least fortunate among us. And that's what Brooklyn Legal Services is about, and so it seems very appropriate for Brooklyn Legal Services to be honoring Zach Carter.
Well, it's again, it's how I was raised. I mean, I never had an expectation other than doing what I've had the opportunity to do in public service. So it never occurred to me that there was a different way of going about my life. Particularly when I became U.S. Attorney. I became U.S. Attorney at a very good time because I think that the law enforcement community was way ahead of politicians in appreciating the importance of doing proactive work in communities and focusing on crime prevention.
It was always as important to him as the prosecution was the state of the community, and he wanted to leave it a better place than he found it.
I think that one way that I always wanted to be measured. I mean, sometimes we in our society are timid to talk about the role of race and ethnicity in our society. And we lurch between extremes of being either preoccupied with race or ignoring it altogether. But one of the things that I thought about when I entered the U.S. Attorney's office as U.S. Attorney was that when I left, I wanted people to feel that it made a difference that there was an African American in that job. That I was focusing on issues that were of special import to people of color. It doesn't mean that you neglect any part of your responsibility affecting the broader population, that you aren't committed to making the community safe for everyone. And so I certainly feel proud that at the end of the day, that in terms of the prosecutions we brought and the programs that we brought to communities, that focus to a large extent on the least privileged, and that in our society is coincident with very often with color, that I was able to make a difference in that regard.
I think he has made a difference, and I don't think he's finished making a difference. I think he'll go on making a difference in ways that I can't yet guess, because I think that is fundamental to who he is.
I was born here, and I spent all but 4 years of my life here. Brooklyn to me is people. It's houses, it's neighborhoods. Even growing up, it was all here, and I loved it, and I still do. It was in 1959 that I came here, Transfiguration Parish, and the brink of the 60s, what can I say? I had the delightful experience of living here in the 60s when everything was changing. The United States was in the midst of the Vietnam War, there were protests, the world was changing.
Parish community, Transfiguration, the wider community, Williamsburg, and even the wider community than that, the Latino immigrant that have come to New York in the last 50 years is the place where she feels comfortable, loved, and carries out her vocation and her calling.
By 1965, I had begun to study Spanish. Spanish was a priority in my life because of the community. We talked a lot about the idea of living among the people, that it would really be important to understand, especially because the community was changing. So we lived in a 4-room apartment, and I lived on the Southside from 66 until 82. In 2 different buildings, and it was a wonderful experience.
Peggy was just delightful in being with the youngsters and enjoying them and yet leading them. You know, you can't become a teenager. You can love them, and she could do that. She could fool around with them and yet always be Sister Peggy.
Some of them had serious problems. Parents didn't speak English, and a lot of them were getting away with a whole lot. You know, on the street we had gangs in Williamsburg at that point, and it was a kind of a challenge to keep these kids involved, not just in school, but after school hours. My main ministry, if you will, is immigration counseling. Being here is not a challenge. It's a beautiful. I mean, I receive more from the people here than I've ever given them in the years that I've been here. But the challenge is trying to help the people that come to us, and sometimes helping them just means consoling them.
She was able to give an ear, able to send them on a way that they might be able to do something. She was able, if not to help that person, maybe to help a family member. So she's impacted on their lives dramatically.
I don't want to impose my spirituality or my particular brand of faith, if you will, but I think people, you communicate it just by loving people and by sharing with them and listening to them, to their stories and so on. And I think very often, without even mentioning the word God, love communicates itself and caring.
The joy with which she serves, the dignity and respect that she has for the people she serves, the effectiveness of her work, and literally several thousand people have legalized their status in the United States or gotten legal permission to work in the United States. That's tremendous amount of service to people.
Many of the people who are now in their 40s or 50s, I've seen since. And one day I was opening my office door, and I saw this uniformed fellow standing outside the school just looking up, and I said, "May I help you?" And he looked at me and he said, "Sister Margaret?" And all of a sudden I realized it was Renee Villanueva, and I said, "Renee?" And he said, "Oh," and he started to cry. This big man. He said, "I pass here every week." And he said, "I always stop." He said, "If I don't stop at the corner to say a little prayer in front of the church, I stop at the school." He said, "My happiest days were in this school."
I think it's important to recognize people that really do good work. That's a great blessing in life, to like what you do.
I just think that God has been very good to me, and I've been given the opportunity to share that with so many other people. it's been good.